Picture the house from Little Women. You know the one. Warm firelight on the windows, 4 sisters laughing around a piano, a mother called Marmee who always has bread and always has answers, a father, absent but noble, serving somewhere in the war, sending letters full of wisdom. Christmas mornings, amateur theatricals in the attic, genteel poverty that never actually hurts anyone. Now let me show you the real house. The fire is out because there is no money for wood, and the father is home, sitting in the cold parlour, refusing on principle to earn a single dollar. The mother has pawned her own silver spoons, and then her mother's silver spoons, and is now taking in other people's laundry with hands that crack and bleed in the winter water. One of the 4 real sisters will die at 22, so wasted by illness that the undertaker will assume the body belongs to a woman of 40. Another will die at 39, far from home, and her family will learn of it by letter. The girl who becomes Jo, the funny one, the famous one, the one generations of readers wanted to be, will spend her last 20 years being slowly poisoned by the medicine that was supposed to save her, and she will die at 55, 2 days after her father, without ever being told that he was gone. That's the real March family, the Alcotts of Concord, Massachusetts. And the strange, uncomfortable truth is this: Little Women wasn't a portrait of their life. It was the life they never got to have. It was a woman taking 30 years of cold rooms and dead sisters and humiliation and hunger and sanding the pain off every single memory until it could sit safely on a child's bedside table. Tonight we're going back, not to the novel, to the truth underneath it. One family, 4 decades, everything they actually saw, smelled, carried, buried, and survived. So, I make these history stories, and honestly, I have no clue if anyone actually sleeps to them, or if you're all just lying in the dark wondering what 19th century laundry water does to a woman's hands by February. Either way, subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. It is December of 1843 and you are 11 years old, and you're hungry in a way that has stopped being an event and become a climate. Your name is Louisa May Alcott. You're lying under a thin blanket in an unheated attic room of a farmhouse in Harvard, Massachusetts, 14 miles from Concord, 90 miles of bad road from anywhere that matters. The farmhouse is called Fruitlands, which is already a joke, because the fruit trees your father talked about all summer, the orchards of the New Eden, consist of 10 old apple trees, half of them barren. The cold in this room is not the cold of a chilly night. It is structural. It lives in the plaster. The window above your head has frost on the inside, a fern pattern of white crystal you could scrape off with your fingernail if your fingers were willing to leave the blanket, which they are not. Your breath is visible in the dark. You know this without seeing it. The way you know the shape of your sister Anna breathing beside you, the way you know that somewhere below, your mother is already awake, because your mother is always already awake. You're hungry because supper was bread and water, not as punishment, as philosophy. Your father, Bronson Alcott, believes that the body is a temple, and that almost everything people put into it is a defilement. No meat. A dead animal in your mouth makes you an accomplice to murder. No milk, no butter, no cheese, no eggs. Those belong to the cow and the hen, and taking them is theft. No sugar. Sugar is grown by enslaved people, and he is right about that at least. No coffee, no tea, no wool because wool belongs to the sheep. No cotton because cotton is slavery again. No leather. No manure on the fields, because manure is filth, and the earth should not be forced. No animals pulling the plough, because that is enslaving the ox, which leaves linen tunics in a Massachusetts winter, canvas shoes in the snow, and a diet of bread, apples, water, and whatever vegetables grew in fields ploughed too late by men who spent the planting season having conversations about the nature of the soul. You know the exact texture of this bread. It is coarse, unleavened, made from unbolted flour, and your father calls each loaf a sacrament. It is dense enough that your jaw aches by the end of a piece, and it sits in your stomach like a fist, which is almost a mercy, because the fist feels like fullness for an hour before it dissolves, and the hunger comes back with the patience of tide. Here is what nobody tells you when they hand you the pretty version of this family. At Fruitlands, in the winter of 1843, the Alcott children were cold and underfed in service of a theory, and the theory belonged entirely to men who did not do the washing. Downstairs you hear it now, the scrape of the kettle, the particular hollow knock of the water bucket against the lip of the well outside, which means your mother has gone out into the dark in her thin dress to draw water that will have a skin of ice on it. You hear the crack as she breaks that skin. You're 11, and you already understand something you will spend 40 years trying to write down without screaming. The philosophy is upstairs asleep, and the labour is outside in the dark, and the labour is always, always your mother. Get up. The floorboards will burn your bare feet with cold, that specific bite, like stepping on the flat of a knife. You do it fast, hopping, snatching your clothes from the chair where they froze into their folds overnight. The linen doesn't warm to your body the way wool would. It just conducts the cold inward, efficiently, for the first half hour, and your skin prickles into goose flesh under it, and your fingers fumble the ties because fingers this cold don't fold, they only hinge. Anna is up too, 16 and silent, braiding her hair with red hands. Little Lizzie, she is just 8, sleeps a moment longer, curled around baby Abba May, who is 3 and whimpering. You look at Lizzie's face in the grey light. Remember it. Remember her exactly like this, warm and whole and 8 years old, because this story is going to take her from you, and I want you to know what you had. Downstairs, the kitchen smells of cold ash, damp plaster, and yesterday's bread. A sourness underneath everything. The smell of a house where nothing is ever quite dry and nothing is ever quite enough. Your mother, Abigail, Mabba, is at the hearth coaxing a fire out of green wood that hisses and spits and gives smoke before it gives heat. The smoke stings your eyes. She doesn't turn around. She says your name once softly and tells you to slice the bread, and you take the knife. The handle icy, the blade dragging through the dense loaf so that you have to lean your whole small weight onto it, sawing, the crumb tearing instead of cutting. And this is your morning, and every morning. There are other people in this house. That's the part the novel erased completely. Fruitlands is not a family farm. It is a consociate family, a commune, one of dozens of utopian experiments sprouting across New England in the 1840s like mushrooms after rain. Brook Farm has dozens of members and dances in the evenings. Fruitland has never had more than about 13 souls, and most of them are the kind of men who arrive with a theory and leave before the harvest. There is a man who eats only apples. There is a man who believes clothing is a lie and has to be talked out of proving it. There is a man who reverses the usual arrangement and wears his beard long while shaving his head. And there is Charles Lane. Remember that name, because Charles Lane is the quiet villain of your childhood. An Englishman, severe, precise, With a voice like cold water and money, he is the one who actually paid for this farm, $1,800 for 90 acres, which means he believes he has purchased not just the land but the direction of every soul on it. Lane believes the family itself, mother, father, children, the private love between them, is a form of selfishness. He calls it that at the table while eating your mother's bread. He believes your father should give up his wife and children the way he gave up meat and rise into a purer, colder association of spirits. And your father listens. That is the thing you cannot say out loud at 11. The thing that sits in your chest like the bread sits in your stomach. Your father listens. He sits by the fire your mother built, in the clean shirt your mother washed, and he seriously discusses with Charles Lane whether attachment to his own family is a spiritual failure he ought to overcome. You keep a journal. Your father reads it. Everyone's journals are read here, examined for signs of spiritual progress, and even your private page is not private. So you learn early to write two ways: the sentences that are for inspection and the ones underneath folded small. On one page this winter you will write simply that you wish you were rich, you wish the family was together and at peace. An 11-year-old's entire theology in one line. Anger is your sin. Everyone says so. You run when girls should walk. You shout when girls should murmur. You once rolled a hoop clear around Boston Common at 6 years old and got lost and were found at nightfall by the town crier with your head pillowed on a strange dog. There is a fire in you that this cold house cannot put out, and everyone treats the fire as your flaw. It will take you 30 years to understand that the fire was the only thing that kept this family alive. Let me take you through one day of this experiment, because the details are the indictment. You wake before dawn as you've just done. Cold water for washing, cold on purpose, a bracing cold bath being part of the regimen, and there is a special misery in stripping in an unheated room to pour well water over your own shoulders. The gasp it forces out of you, the way your skin goes tight and burning cold at once, the way you dry yourself on rough linen that scrapes rather than absorbs. Then a breakfast of bread, porridge without milk and water, then lessons. Because Fruitlands is also a school of a kind. Your father was a school teacher once, a famous one briefly in Boston before it all collapsed. And say this for Bronson Alcott, because it is true and it matters. He is, in his way, decades ahead of his time. In his temple school he abolished flogging. He asked children questions and listened to the answers. He believed a child's mind was not an empty pail to fill, but a lamp to light. Educators a century later will build careers on ideas he was mocked for. When he wanted to punish a wrongdoing student, he sometimes made the student strike him, Bronson, instead, so the child would feel what it is to hurt someone who loves you. Children wept. It worked. Boston destroyed him for it anyway. He published his classroom conversations with children about the Gospels, children speculating freely about birth and God and the body, and the newspapers called it obscene and blasphemous. Parents pulled their children out, and when enrollment had collapsed to nearly nothing, he committed the final unforgivable act. He admitted a black girl, Susan Robinson, to the class. The remaining white families walked out. The school died. He never really held a paying position again. So understand your father as you sit at his cold morning lessons. He is not a fraud. That would be simpler. He is a genuinely original mind attached to a man who has decided that his own purity matters more than whether his children eat. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great Emerson, your father's loyal friend, quietly paying this family's bills for years, will put it in his journal with terrible precision that Bronson expects everyone else to keep his sacred fire burning while he tends the flame of his own thoughts. Lessons end, then work. And here is the arithmetic of Fruitlands, the only profit calculation this farm will ever produce. 90 acres, a growing season. And the men plant late, because June was spent in discussion, and they plant 3 different grains in the same field at one point, because the sowing was as disorganized as the doctrine, and they refuse manure, so the yield is thin, and at the exact moment the barley, the crop that is supposed to carry everyone through the winter, stands ripe in the field, your father and Charles Lane leave. They go travelling, recruiting, lecturing on the new Eden to audiences in other towns, while the actual Eden stands unharvested under a sky going the colour of a bruise. You are there for what happens next, and you will remember it your whole life. The storm comes up in the afternoon. You feel it first as a change in the air, that metallic smell of rain on hot dust, the light going green-yellow, the wind arriving in one long push that flattens the grass, and your mother looks at that barley and looks at the sky and understands with the cold clarity of the only adult on the property that the difference between eating and not eating this winter is lying in that field. So Abigail Alcott takes clothes baskets, laundry baskets, linen sheets, and she goes into the barley with her children, with you, and you harvest a grain field with your hands and bed linens ahead of the rain. You will remember the barley whipping in the wind, the awns of it needle in your forearms into a red rash, the ache that starts between your shoulder blades and spreads down like poured water, the way your hands cramp into claws around the stalks, chaff in your mouth, chaff in your eyes, your mother working beside you with her skirts soaked to the knee when the first rain arrives, not stopping, none of you stopping, dragging the loaded sheets to the barn while thunder walks the hills, an 11-year-old girl, a 16-year-old girl, an 8-year-old, a woman of 43, saving what could be saved of a harvest that the philosophers planted badly and abandoned. They saved some of it, not enough. And now the winter closes in, and the experiment begins to die, and it dies the way these things always die. Not in a single catastrophe, but in a series of small subtractions. The apple-eating man leaves. The others leave. By November, the consociate family is down to its actual family, plus Lane and his son, and the food is bread and apples and water, and the snow is deep, and Charles Lane makes his final move. He proposes seriously that the community should adopt the model of the Shakers, the celibate sect in the next valley. Husbands and wives separated, children raised in common, the family dissolved as a spiritual error, and through the wall, through the thin cold plaster of that farmhouse, you hear your parents talking late into the night, night after night, your mother's voice low and shaking, your father's voice going silent for long, terrible stretches, and you understand, at 11, lying rigid in the dark with Anna's hand finding yours under the blanket, that your father is deciding whether to keep you. Your mother ends it. That is the part to hold on to. Abigail May Alcott, who has followed this man through every collapse, who has pawned her inheritance and begged from her relatives and worked herself grey. Abba draws the one line she will not let anyone cross. She tells him, in substance, I am taking the children. You may come. In January 1844, Lane gives up and departs for the Shakers, and your father, faced with the ruin of his Eden, the departure of his prophet friend, the failure of everything, turns his face to the wall and stops eating. For days he lies there declining food, declining speech, a man attempting to die of disappointment, and you children creep past the door and your mother sits with him, and whatever passes between them in that room, at the end of it he turns back, he gets up, he eats. The family leaves Fruitlands in the snow, your possessions on a hired sled, the failed farm receding behind you, and your mother writes in her journal words to the effect that they leave the ashes of one home, not knowing where the next will be. She had already, months earlier, given her daughters the truest sentence anyone will say in your entire childhood. On your birthday, in the middle of it all, she wrote to you that a mother's love outlasts everything, and privately she wrote something harder and better, that a woman may live a whole life of poverty and toil, and be nothing at the end but hopeful and worn out. She was describing herself. You read it, and something in you, the fire everyone keeps calling your sin, takes an oath, not in words. 11-year-olds don't swear oaths in words, but it is there from now on, under everything you do. I will earn. I will pay for this family. I will buy Marmee a warm room if it kills me. Keep that sentence. It is the engine of the whole story, and the last clause is not a figure of speech. The years after Fruitlands are the years the novel turned into charming genteel shabbiness, and I need you to feel what they actually were. So let's live in them a while, because this is where you grow up. The Alcotts move and move and move. Count it across the whole span, and the family changes address more than 20 times in 30 years. Rented rooms, borrowed houses, relatives' spare chambers, half of Concord and a rotating slice of Boston. You learn the specific choreography of poverty, the rope-handled trunk you can pack in 20 minutes because you've done it so often, the way you carry a lamp downstairs wrapped in your own shawl because it's the one object that breaks, the sound of your mother in a landlord conversation through a closed door. You can tell how bad the rent situation is by the pitch of the murmur. You never need the words. Money comes from 3 sources, and none of them is your father. It comes from Emerson, quietly, folded into your mother's hand or arranged as payment for lectures no one attended. It comes from your mother's relatives, the Mays, respectable Boston people who never stop being appalled. And it comes, increasingly, from your mother herself, who in Boston becomes one of the first paid social workers in American history, a missionary to the poor, visiting immigrant families in cellar rooms, distributing relief, writing reports about sewage and wages that nobody asks for and nobody acts on. She goes down into rooms where 6 people share one bed and the walls run with damp, and she comes home smelling of those rooms. You know the smell on her cloak, tallow smoke and mildew and sickness, and she empties her own thin purse into theirs, because she is incapable of not doing it. Hold that detail too. Your mother's charity to the poor is going to cost this family more than money. It is going to cost you Lizzie. But not yet. You, meanwhile, are growing into your teens with 2 assets, a strong back and a head full of stories. You use both. Start with the back, because the back comes first. In this world, in the 1840s and 50s, a poor genteel girl has exactly 4 legal ways to earn. She can teach, she can sew, she can go into service, or she can write. And the last one barely counts, because everyone knows women scribbling pays in compliments. You'll do all 4. You'll do all 4, sometimes in the same month. Sewing you learn to hate with the specificity that gets into your books later. Piecework, Shirts, pillowcases, sheets, paid by the dozen, pennies per piece. You sit by a lamp with your spine curled like a question mark, and you learn what needlework does to a body over hours. The burn that starts at the base of the neck, the right shoulder that sets like plaster, the fingertip of your left forefinger pricked so many times it develops a permanent callus that catches on silk. You learn to sew in the cold, when your fingers slow down and the needle goes stupid in your grip, and you learn the economics of light itself, that working past dark costs lamp oil, and lamp oil costs money, and so you calculate whether the next dozen pillowcases will earn more than the oil it takes to see them. Sometimes the answer is no, and you sew anyway, because the rent doesn't care about your arithmetic. Teaching is worse in a different way. You keep small schools, a room and a dozen children, and you discover you have your father's gift and none of his patience, and the pay is humiliation on a quarterly schedule. Families who don't pay, terms that collapse, the endless smiling required of a young woman who is one bad month from hunger and must never, ever show it. And then there is service, and here I have to slow down, because what happens to you at 18 is one of the wounds this whole life is built around, and the novel never breathed a word of it. Winter, 1851. A gentleman comes to your mother's relief office in Boston, a respectable man, a lawyer from Dedham, seeking a companion for his invalid sister. Light duties, he says, reading aloud, genteel company, a place in the family circle, and you, 19 years old, desperate to take one weight off Mommy's shoulders, volunteer yourself. What you find in Dedham is this. The light duties are the duties of a maid of all work. The invalid sister is real, but the household's actual purpose, as far as you can ever tell, is the gentleman himself, who follows you to the kitchen to read you his philosophical essays, who wants an audience the way a lamprey wants a fish, and who, when you make it coldly clear that you have come to work, not to be courted in doorways, takes his revenge by assigning you the work no one else will do. You haul water. You haul coal, the scuttle's wire handle biting a groove into your fingers, the black dust working into the cracks of your knuckles where no scrubbing gets it out. You shovel snow. You split kindling in the yard while your breath freezes on your collar. You black his boots. In February you dig paths through snowfall with hands already split at the knuckles, the cold getting into the splits like a wire. You stay 7 weeks because leaving feels like defeat, and because the family at home needs whatever this earns. When you finally go, they put your wages in your hand. $4, 7 weeks, $4. You look at the money. You will tell this story for years, and the sum never changes. And when you get home and lay it on the table, your family is so insulted on your behalf that they send it back. Poor as you are, the Alcotts return the $4 to Dedham, because there is a line even below poverty, and it is called contempt, and you will not be paid in it. That is the education the novel skipped. Jo March sells her hair in one brave romantic scene. Louisa Alcott blacked a lecherous lawyer's boots for 7 weeks for $4 and learned exactly what the world thought a poor woman's time was worth. But you have the other asset, the stories. They start as theatricals in barns and attics. You and Anna writing melodramas, Lizzie and May dragooned into the small parts, cambric capes and paper boots. You always playing the villain because the villain gets the good lines. They continue in the little newspapers you write for your sisters, and then, at 20, they cross the line into money. A poem published for nothing, then a story, $5, then another. Then a first thin book of fairy tales you wrote at 16 for Emerson's daughter, published for a pittance, and you discover the trapdoor in the respectable literary market. Underneath the polite magazines lies a roaring cellar of story papers, weeklies with names like flags, printed on paper that smudges your fingers grey, paying $10, $25, $50, eventually $100 for what everyone calls blood and thunder tales. Madness, opium, mesmerism, vengeful women, poison, bigamy, pursuit, and you, the minister's daughter adjacent Concord girl, are magnificently good at them. You write them in secret under pseudonyms. A.M. Barnard is the one history will finally unmask a century later, and here is the delicious, furious truth of it. The wildest, angriest, most dangerous fiction you ever write. The stories full of women who manipulate and dominate and refuse and win are the ones you can never sign. The sweet stuff gets your name. The truth gets an alias. You write them in what you come to call the vortex. It deserves description, because it's going to shape and shorten your life. When a story takes you, you go into your room and you do not properly come out. You write for 14 hours at a stretch. You forget meals, or take them standing, bread in the left hand, pen in the right. You run all day, as you put it, on a fit of writing, and you can't stop. Your right hand cramps first, that deep ache along the thumb's root, so you teach yourself to write with your left hand as well, switching when the right gives out, an ambidexterity born purely of production quotas. Your head aches, your eyes burn. You emerge days later, hollowed, with a manuscript and a headache that lasts a week, and you mail the manuscript and note the payment in your careful account book, because every dollar has an assignment before it arrives. Rent, Marmy's cloak, May's drawing lessons, the interest on debts your father accumulated before you were born. That account book is the truest autobiography you will ever write. Not the journal, the ledger, decades of it, earned by stories. So much, earned by sewing, so much, sent home, nearly all of it. Through these years, the family finally gets a house. Hillside in Concord, bought with your mother's small inheritance and Emerson's help. The house where you are properly a teenager. The golden interval later strip-mined for the sunniest chapters of Little Women. And Concord itself deserves one honest look, because you grow up on the most improbable street in American literature. Emerson is a neighbour and lends you his library. Henry David Thoreau, yes, that Thoreau, takes you children out in his boat and shows you where the muskrats live, plays his flute on the water, tells you a cobweb is a handkerchief dropped by a fairy, and you half love him for the rest of your life. Nathaniel Hawthorne buys Hillside from your family later and broods behind its hedges, and here is the joke history plays. All those great men, the ones with the marble busts waiting in their futures, you will outsell every one of them, combined. The scribbling girl next door, the one doing their neighbour's laundry, not one of them sees it coming. But before any of that, before the money and the fame, comes the year that breaks the family's heart, and it begins, as the worst things in this story always begin, with your mother's kindness. In 1856, the family's living in the town of Walpole, New Hampshire, and your mother, of course, has found the poorest family in town to help. Immigrant neighbours, destitute, and their children are sick. She goes to them with food and nursing, and she brings Lizzie and May along to help, because in this family charity is not an errand, it is an inheritance. The children have scarlet fever. You know what scarlet fever is in 1856? Nobody does. That's the point. No one knows it is streptococcus. No one knows what a bacterium is. The germ theory of disease is still a generation away. What people know is what they see. The sore throat like swallowing glass, the fever and then the rash, a red flush like a sunburn, rough under the fingertips like fine sandpaper, spreading from the chest outward, the tongue going strawberry red. Most people survive the fever itself. It is what comes after, silently, weeks later, in the joints and the heart and the kidneys. That does the killing, and no one in 1856 can see it coming. May takes the fever lightly and shakes it off. Lizzie takes it hard, and Lizzie never really comes back. I want you to understand who Lizzie is, because the novel made her a saint, and saints are easy to lose. Beth March, the shy angel at the piano, too good for this world. The real Elizabeth Sewell Alcott is a person. She is the quiet one in a family of loud ones, yes, but quiet the way a held breath is quiet, not the way an angel is. She is the sister who stays home. While you're out fighting the world for wages, Lizzie is the one keeping the small machinery of the household turning, the mending, the bread, the kettle, and she does it so steadily that the family calls her their little tranquillity, and steadiness is the easiest virtue in the world to take for granted. She loves music, and the piano detail is true, real enough that it hurts. She is shy to the point of pain with strangers. She is 20 when the fever takes her, not a child. And over the 2 years that follow, you watch a 20-year-old woman become an old one. It happens slowly, which is the cruelest available speed. The fever passes and she is recovering, except the recovery has no flaw. Her strength doesn't return. She tires from crossing a room. Her appetite goes, and then her flesh goes. You notice it in the wrists first, the way her wrist bones rise as the arm thins, the way her rings won't stay on. Her digestion fails. Some days are better, and the better days are the trap, because every one of them lets the family hope again, and hope. Repeated and revoked is its own long injury. The family moves back to Concord in 1857, into the house that will become the famous one, Orchard House. But it needs months of repairs, so the winter finds you in rented rooms nearby, and it is in those rooms that everyone stops pretending. The doctor comes, examines Lizzie, and speaks to your mother in the hallway in the low voice you've been reading through doors your whole life. There is no cure coming. What is failing now cannot be repaired. And here the family does something that you should know about, because it tells you everything about who these people are under the poverty and the philosophy. They tell Lizzie the truth. No conspiracies of cheerfulness, no lying to the dying. And Lizzie, quiet Lizzie, the one who never asks for anything, receives her own death sentence with a composure that shames everyone in the room, and begins, in her methodical way, to put her small affairs in order. She gives away her things. She has so few things. A girl who owned almost nothing, deciding who should have it. The last months are nursing, and the nursing is mostly yours and your mother's. This is where you learn the profession that will nearly kill you 5 years later. You learn the mechanics of caring for a body that is leaving. How to lift a person who has become mostly angles, one arm under the shoulder blades, one under the knees, her head finding your collarbone, and she weighs so little now that the lightness itself is the horror. Lifting her is like lifting a bundle of kindling wrapped in a nightgown. You learn to change sheets under a person who cannot rise, rolling her gently to one side, the warm, sour smell of the sickbed rising as the linen lifts, working fast so she isn't chilled. You learn the sounds of a bad night. the particular rhythm of breathing you come to dread, the small sleeping cries. And you learn to sit in the dark with your hand on her hair, doing the one thing that seems to help, which is being there, which is nothing, which is everything. She sews, almost to the end. That detail is real, and I will never get over it. Propped in bed, too weak to hold a book for long, Lizzie makes little things, pen wipers, needle books, small gifts, and has them set aside for the people she's going to leave. She's stitching her own goodbyes. When her fingers can no longer manage the needle, she lays the work down, and everyone in the house understands what that means, and no one says it. In her last week she asks for the laudanum more often, the opium tincture that is the only mercy 1858 has to offer, and she tells the family she is ready. She uses those words. There comes an evening in March when she asks to be held and passes into unconsciousness, and in the small hours of March 14th, 1858, with your mother on one side of her and you on the other, Lizzie's breathing goes shallower and slower, with long waiting gaps that each time seem final and then are not, until one is. She was 22. When the women came to prepare the body, the undertaker's people assumed they were looking at a woman of 40. That is what those 2 years did. 2 days later, you buried her at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, on the ridge they call Author's Ridge now. Thoreau helped carry the coffin. Emerson stood at the grave. And you wrote in your journal that grief teaches you more than philosophy ever did, or words very close to that, and you meant it as fact, not comfort. And because life has no shame about its timing, within days of the funeral, Anna announces her engagement. John Bridge Pratt, a good, kind, unremarkable man, and you hate him. You are honest enough in your journal to say so in almost as many words. It feels like a second death. The family breaking apart at both ends in a single month, one sister into the ground and one into another man's house. At the wedding, in 1860, in the parlour at Orchard House, you dance and you smile and you write bitterly afterward in private. The novel will turn John Pratt into John Brooke and give the resentment to Joe, softened into comedy. The original was not comedy. The original was a 25-year-old woman standing in a parlour that still smelled faintly of her sister's funeral flowers, watching the family she had sworn to hold together dissolve anyway. One loss disguised as grief and the other disguised as joy. So you do what you always do with what you cannot bear. You work, and then the country hands you a war. April 1861, Fort Sumter. Concord empties its young men onto trains, and you stand at the depot with a crowd and write in your journal that you long to be a man, that since you cannot fight, you will work for those who do. For a year and a half that means sewing again, bandage rolling, blue flannel shirts for soldiers, the same needle, the same cramped shoulder, patriotism at pennies a seam. It is not enough. It was never going to be enough for you. You are the girl whose sin was fire. In November 1862, just before your 30th birthday, you apply to serve as an army nurse. Union hospitals, desperate for hands, have begun accepting women over the sputtering objections of nearly everyone, under Dorothea Dix, who wants her nurses over 30 and plain, on the theory that plainness is armour. You are 30 in 3 weeks, and striking rather than pretty, and you get your assignment, the Union Hotel Hospital, Georgetown, Washington, D.C. On December 11th, 1862, you leave Concord alone. Your mother cries at the door. Your father says in his grave way that he is sending his only son to war. You travel by train and boat through a winter landscape filling up with soldiers, and you arrive in Washington. Swollen, muddy, unfinished Washington, the Capitol dome itself still under scaffolding, pigs in the avenues, army wagons axle deep, and you report to the Union Hotel. Here is your hospital. It is not a hospital. It is a decayed hotel, a tavern really, requisitioned by the army. 40-odd years old, damp, dark and wrong for its new purpose in every particular. The ballroom is a ward. The bar is a ward. Windows painted or nailed shut so the air does not move. No proper ventilation. No proper drainage. The kitchen sends up grease smoke through the halls. The cellars send up rot. 300 beds worth of wounded and sick men in a building that would have been condemned as a hotel, and you will sleep upstairs in a closet-sized room and work 12-hour shifts, and you have been a nurse for exactly the length of Lizzie's dying and not 1 day more. Your first days are almost quiet. Measles cases, typhoid cases, chronic wounds, long enough to learn the geography and to notice the smell, which I will get to, because the smell is the main character of this building. And then, on the morning of December 13th, 1862, 40 miles south of you, General Burnside sends the Army of the Potomac across the river at Fredericksburg and straight up an open slope at a stone wall, wave after wave all day, into massed rifles and artillery. Nearly 13,000 Union men fall. It is one of the most lopsided slaughters of the entire war. 3 days later, the ambulances start arriving at your door. You hear them before you see them. Iron tires on frozen mud, a grinding rumble that doesn't stop because the wagons come in a chain, 40 at a time, and inside each one, men who have been jolted 40 miles over corduroy roads with fresh wounds, some of whom have not eaten in 3 days, some of whom froze half to death on the field before anyone reached them. The matron puts her head into the ward and says the wounded are coming, and the whole building changes state, like water hitting a hot pan. And when the doors open, the smell arrives first. I told you the smell was the main character. Here it is in full. Hundreds of men who have marched, fought, bled, and been carted for days without washing. Wet wool uniforms crusted with mud and blood gone black. Powder smoke soaked into cloth. The copper and butcher shop smell of open wounds. Feet. The smell of hundreds of ruined feet is a thing you will mention for the rest of your life. And under it all, already, the sweetish edge of wounds going bad. You stand in the hall with a bottle of lavender water someone has handed you to sprinkle, and you understand instantly what a joke it is. A teaspoon of lavender against an ocean, and you sprinkle it anyway, and then you put the bottle in your pocket and go to work. The men come in on stretchers and on each other's shoulders and on their own wrecked feet. They fill the beds and then the floors, laid in rows on the boards, still in their bloody coats, some so caked in Virginia clay that you cannot tell wound from mud until the clothes come off. And your first assignment, the very first task of your war, is this: wash them. You, an unmarried woman of Concord, Massachusetts, raised in a household where the word leg was daring, are handed a basin of water, a block of brown soap and a sponge, and directed to strip and wash broken, strange men by the dozen. You will tell the story later with the comedy it deserves, how you drown your embarrassment in the basin and scrub away like any tired mother at a Saturday night bath. But feel the actual work of it in your hands for a minute. The water goes grey, then brown, then red, and you change it, and it happens again. The soap won't lather in the cold. You learn to cut a boot off a frostbitten foot rather than pull it. One blade of the scissors sliding flat along the shin, the leather parting stiffly, and you learn what you may find inside. You learn that mud dries into wool like mortar, and that a man will apologize to you. Apologize for the state of his own shattered body, and that the ones who joke are often the worst hurt, and that a 19-year-old with his arm gone at the shoulder may want more than morphine to have his face wiped and to tell you about his mother's kitchen. You learn the sounds of the ward at night, because you are given the night watch soon enough. 3 a.m. rounds with a shaded lamp, moving between beds in the dark. The sounds sort themselves into a vocabulary. Ordinary snoring, which is music. The tight, careful breathing of a man managing pain by will. Muttering fever dreams. Men refight the battle in their sleep. They call orders, they call names. The creak of the building itself, and rats. This fine hotel has rats moving in the walls, and sometimes a silence from a bed that was making sound an hour ago, and you go to it, and you stand with your lamp listening for the breath, and some nights the breath is there and some nights it is not. The medicine of this place deserves one clear-eyed look, because it is about to enter your own bloodstream. The surgeons are not monsters. They are men working with the knowledge of 1862, which is to say, on the far side of the germ theory. There is anaesthesia, ether, chloroform, for the operations, thank God. But antisepsis does not exist. A surgeon wipes his blade on a rag and goes to the next man. Puss in a wound is called laudable, a good sign, because they believe it is part of healing, and the pharmacy rests on a foundation of opium, whiskey, quinine, and one drug above all, calomel. Remember calomel, mercurous chloride, a soft white powder, dosed for nearly everything. Fevers, typhoid, dysentery, biliousness. On the theory that a violent purge cleans out disease, what it actually does is deliver mercury into a human body. Give enough of it, and the patient's mouth ulcerates, teeth loosen, saliva pours. The doctors call this tirelism, and consider it evidence the medicine is working. Mercury, meanwhile, is walking into the nerves, the joints, the brain, and it does not leave. Hold it on the shelf. It is loaded now. You work. 12-hour days that stretch. You feed the men who cannot feed themselves. You learn to hold a spoon to a mouth in a burned face, to guess how much a shaking man can swallow. You write their letters, which is the duty that ambushes you. Sitting on a stool with paper on a book on your knee, taking dictation from a boy to his mother, choosing with him which facts to include and which to leave out. And then the other letters, the ones you write alone after the bed is empty, that begin with the worst sentence in the English language, and try, in your best hand, to give a stranger's mother something to keep. And there is John. His name is John Sewer, a blacksmith from Virginia, a big, quiet, gentle man shot through the lungs at Fredericksburg, and every account you ever give of this war returns to him. So we will not hurry past. He is the handsomest and the most patient man in your ward, and he is dying, and he is the only one who doesn't know it, because he is so uncomplaining that no one has had the heart to tell him. The surgeon leaves the telling to you. You sit by him through his nights. The wound in his back must be dressed, and dressing it is agony he absorbs almost silently, his hand crushing yours through the worst of it, his face turned away so you won't see it working. And when he asks you, plainly, whether this is it, you tell him the truth, because your family taught you that dying people are owed the truth, and he takes it the way Lizzie took it, with a kind of shocking grace, and asks you to help him with the last letter to his brother. He dies holding your hand, and his grip is so strong at the end that his hand leaves its mark on yours, and you write later that you kept the feeling of it a long time. They cut a lock of his hair for you. You're becoming a small museum of the dead. Understand what is happening to you in these weeks physically, because the collapse is being assembled hour by hour. You barely eat. The food is the men's food, and the men's food is a scandal. Rancid butter, fly-blown beef, bread gone stale in transit, coffee you describe as muddy, warm water. You barely sleep. You go out into the raw river damp of Georgetown December with your hair wet from washing the fever sweat out of it. You live inside a sealed, unventilated building saturated with typhoid and pneumonia, and your body has been running on will and bread for a decade before you ever got here. In the first week of January 1863, the cough starts. Then the ache in the bones, deep, like something tightening in the marrow. Then the fever climbing at night, the ward beginning to tilt gently when you cross it. The other nurses tell you to lie down. You do not lie down. You have been here scarcely 3 weeks, sworn for 3 months. You have never once in your life stopped before the job was done, and you literally do not know how. You go on rounds with your head roaring. The matron finds you finally unable to continue, and the diagnosis is the one you already know from the beds all around you. Typhoid pneumonia. They put you to bed in your little room under the eaves, and the doctors of 1863 begin, with complete confidence and the best intentions in the world, to treat you. With calomel. Heroic doses of it, day after day, the mercury goes in. You are delirious for much of what follows, and your delirium is vivid and terrible, and you will remember pieces of it all your life. A recurring Spanish nightmare husband who comes at you through windows, a mob, a witch burning, the ward and the fever braided together. Somewhere in it, word reaches Concord that you are dying, and your father, Bronson Alcott, 63 years old, the man of theories, gets on a train in the middle of a war winter and comes to Washington to bring his daughter home. Whatever ledger you keep against your father, and you keep one, write this on the other side of it. He came, and he sat by you, and he brought you back. Days of trains and boats with you half conscious, wrapped in blankets. Strangers helping carry you at the transfers. You're home by late January. You do not clearly remember arriving. You surface weeks later in your own bed at Orchard House, and the woman in the mirror stops you cold, gaunt, grey-faced and shorn. Your hair, your one vanity, 1.5 yards of thick chestnut hair, cut off during the fever. In the novel, Jo sells her hair in an act of splendid volunteer courage, and it is the scene everyone remembers. Here is where that scene actually came from. A delirious woman's head shaved in a sick room. You transmuted it, like you transmuted everything. You gave the loss a hero and a purpose, because in fiction you could. Your fever breaks. Your body, 20 years of overwork notwithstanding, is strong, and it climbs back. But something has changed that will never change back, and it takes you months to admit the shape of it. The aches in your legs do not leave. Strange pains begin their circuits. Leg, back, jaw. Your mouth is ruined for a while. The calomel did its work there thoroughly. Your nerves feel scraped. You are 30 years old, and the tireless body, the one that walked 20 miles for fun, that ran the Concord roads at dawn because running felt like flying, the body that was your one inexhaustible bank, has been quietly nationalized by pain. No one in 1863 can tell you why, because no one knows what mercury does. You will spend the rest of your life chasing the cause under other names, rheumatism, neuralgia, nerves, and chasing cures. Rest, mind cures, magnetism, morphine when it gets bad. Modern readers of your symptoms point straight at the calomel, and some add that the illness itself may have set your own immune system against you. Either way, the sentence is the same. The war took 6 weeks of your service and charged you the remaining 25 years. And here, this is the part of the story where fate reveals its sense of humour. Here is where everything turns, because you write it down. You copy out and rework the letters you sent home from the hospital, and a magazine runs them in instalments, and in 1863 they appear as a little book, Hospital Sketches, and it lands. Not because it is pretty, because it is true. Northern readers are starving for an honest human account of what is happening to their sons, and here is a nurse, funny and unflinching in the same paragraph, telling them. The little book sells, and for the first time in your life, editors write to you. You have spent 15 years knocking. The war, which broke your health, has opened the door. The 5 years between the hospital and the famous book are a strange striving in between. You publish a serious adult novel, Moods, and watch the critics, including a very young Henry James, pat it on the head. You keep the pseudonymous thrillers flowing underneath, because thrillers pay the coal bill. You go to Europe for a year as a paid companion to an invalid, another servant's post wearing a lady's bonnet, and in Switzerland you meet a young Polish musician named Ladislas Wisniewski, charming, consumptive, 12 years your junior, and whatever it is that passes between you on Lake Geneva, you keep it. When a biographer asks decades later about the romances in your life, you cross out what you'd written about him and leave the world one line that you could never be told. He becomes half of Laurie. The other half of Laurie is wishing. And at home, the debts keep their patient arithmetic, and your mother is aging fast now. Worn out is not a metaphor with ABBA. You can see the wearing, her heart and her lungs going, her handwriting loosening in the ledgers she still insists on keeping. And you take over the ledgers, and the family finances become, formally and forever, yours. Then, in September 1867, a Boston publisher named Thomas Niles asks you a question you find frankly annoying. He wants a book for girls. You do not like girls' books. You didn't even much like girls other than your sisters. You were a tomboy who ran with boys and, as you'll cheerfully tell people, never saw the point of the pretty ones. You tell Niles you'll try, and you stall for months, and he applies the one pressure that has worked on you since Fruitlands, a version of "it would be good for the family." Your father's long unsellable manuscripts are involved in the bargain. Fine. Fine. So in May 1868, at a small half-moon desk between 2 windows at Orchard House, a desk your father built into the wall for you, and give him that too. He built his daughter a desk when most fathers of the age would have built her a fence. You sit down, dip the pen, and begin to strip mine your own life. You work in the vortex the way you always work, but this time the material costs nothing to invent because it is all simply there, waiting, sorted by grief. Anna becomes Meg, softened. May becomes Amy, her selfishness made charming. Marmee becomes Marmee, the one character who barely needed changing, though you leave out the pawned spoons and the temper your mother fought all her life, and confessed to you as her own private war, and you give that temper to Jo, which is to say, you keep it, because it was always yours too, inherited like the debts. Your father becomes a gap. Look at what you did, it's astonishing. You took the immovable central problem of your entire existence and solved him by subtraction. Mr. March is away at the war, present only as letters full of gentle wisdom. A father reduced to a signature. Readers found him noble. You had found the only way to write him without lying and without bleeding. Offstage. And Lizzie becomes Beth. You move her death into childhood's antechamber. You light it with lamplight and resignation. You give the world a good death, the kind with meaning, the kind that instructs. The real death, the 2-year attrition, the undertaker mistaking 22 for 40, the needle finally laid down, you fold away. Writing those chapters, you note in your journal that you don't miss the material, you lived it. Some pages you write with what you privately call a lump in the throat that never entirely goes away. You produce 402 manuscript pages in about 10 weeks. Your head aches the whole time. You send it off with a shrug. You and Niles both privately think it's dull. And then his young nieces read the proofs and cannot put them down, and Niles, to his credit, believes the nieces over the adults. Little Women appears at the end of September 1868. First printing, 2,000 copies, gone almost instantly. Then the reprints can't keep pace. Then the letters begin, sacks of them, girls across America demanding to know whom Joe marries, girls writing to Joe as if she were real, because to them she is real, because you built her out of real bones. You write the second half in another 10-week vortex that winter. And you commit, while you're at it, one act of pure authorial spite that readers will argue about for a century and a half. Every letter demands Joe marry Laurie, and you refuse. You won't marry Joe to anyone. You grumble privately, as if marriage were the only end of a woman's story. And when the pressure becomes commercial law, you invent Professor Bear, older, poor, unglamorous, and hand him to Joe like a dare. You called it, in your own words, a funny match made out of perversity. Even your surrenders had teeth. And here is the moment I want you to actually stand inside, because it is the hinge of the whole life. It is 1869, and the royalty statements begin arriving at Orchard House. Real money, then serious money, then money of a kind no one in this family has ever touched. You, who kept the ledger of $4 humiliations, sit at the little half-moon desk with a bank statement, and you write in your journal the sentence you've been trying to write since you were 11 years old in a frozen attic in Harvard, Massachusetts. Paid off the debts, all of them, every dollar, including debts so old they predated your birth, including sums the creditors themselves had forgotten. You record it with the flat exultation of a soldier planting a flag. The debts are paid, and you thank God. 36 years old, oath fulfilled, and your health is already broken, and you know it, and you do the sum anyway and call it worth it, because Marmee will never scrub another floor. From now on there is fire in every room your mother sits in. You buy the comfort retroactively for every winter it was missing. What follows is the strangest decade, the famous one, which is somehow the hardest to see clearly because success is a fog. The books pour out on schedule. An old-fashioned girl, little men, 8 cousins, Rose in Bloom, Joe's Boys eventually. A book every year or two, each one pre-sold by the tens of thousands, and you develop a wry, weary name for the genre that feeds your family. Moral pap for the young. You know exactly what you're doing. The angry pseudonymous fiction dries up. Jo, in the novel, is talked into giving up her sensation stories by the professor, and you, in Life, are bought out of yours by the market. And there are days you mourn it. The old gorgeous lurid freedom natural as your own left hand. Fame itself you find mostly ridiculous. pilgrims turn up at Orchard House wanting to see Joe. You answer the door yourself, and when the mood takes you, inform them that Miss Alcott is away and go back inside. You hate lion hunting. You like the money and say so. You turn your celebrity into a lever for the causes you actually burn for. You write for woman suffrage. You organise. And in 1879, when Massachusetts grants women a sliver of the vote in school committee elections, you make sure of your place in the record, the first woman registered to vote in Concord. You go door to door badgering the other women to register. Most won't. You go anyway, and you cast that first small ballot with 19 other women, and you find it a very tame revolution, and you'd have preferred a bigger one. But the body is presenting its invoice all through these years, and the installments keep growing. The pains move. Leg, back, head. There are months when holding a pen is a negotiation, and you write some of the famous cheerful books with your left hand while the right recovers, or dictate through headaches that sit behind your eyes like a hot stone. Your handwriting changes across the 1870s. You can see it yourself in the ledgers. Sleep becomes unreliable, and the doctor's answers are the era's answers, and some of them are morphine, and you take what lets you work, because work is not optional. Work was never optional. Work is the load-bearing wall of your personality, and by now the entire extended family, Anna widowed young with 2 boys, your parents, May's ambitions, stands on your income like a town on a bridge. Because Anna is widowed, that shouldn't go by in a subordinate clause. John Pratt, the good dull man you resented for taking your sister, dies suddenly in 1870, and Anna is left with 2 small sons, and here is what you do about it. And it is one of the finest things you ever do. You sit down and write Little Men in a White Heat, specifically so that its earnings will secure Anna's boys. You turn grief into an annuity inside a month. The man you once cursed for breaking up the family is dead, and you quietly assume the support of his children for the rest of your life, and you never once frame it as sacrifice. It's just the ledger. Family on one side, your strength on the other, and the balance always paid in the same currency. And May you send to Europe. Once, twice, 3 times. London, Paris, Rome. The art training she was starving for, funded line by line out of the moral paper. And the beautiful, complicated truth is that May is good. Genuinely good. She studies in Paris. She has a still life accepted into the Paris Salon of 1877. The Salon, the real one. And in a twist you relish with a slightly gritted smile. The art establishment of Europe validates the baby of the family while you manufacture wholesome fiction to pay for it. Amy got Europe in the novel because May deserved it in life. You wrote the check both times. Now the endings begin. They come in order of the heart. Marmee goes first. Through the mid-1870s, your mother is visibly failing. Dropsy, they call it then. The swelling and breathlessness of a heart giving out. And you do for her what she did for everyone. You nurse. You move her to the sunniest room. You sit the nights. In the autumn of 1877 she sinks fast, and you're with her at the end in November holding her. And among the last things she says, looking at you, is that you have always been her good daughter. Words to that effect recorded in the family's memory with small variations because everyone in that room kept them like coins. She dies in your arms on the 25th of November, 1877 at 77. And you write afterward in your journal a sentence of terrifying simplicity. She was the greater part of your life, and with her gone, much of the reason for living goes too. You are 45 when you write that. You mean it as bookkeeping, not poetry. The account that had driven you since Fruitlands, earn for Marmy, warm rooms for Marmy, rest for Marmy, is closed. Paid in full and the payee gone. You take her papers, the journals your mother kept through 40 years of pawn shops and cellars and other people's laundry, and you begin reading them with the intention of writing her biography, and you cannot do it. The record of what her life actually cost her, in her own hand, is more than you can hold. Eventually you burn a great part of those papers, and whether that was protection or grief or both, no one will ever get to ask you. 2 years later, it is May. May, who stayed in Europe. May, who at 38 scandalised and delighted everyone by marrying a Swiss businessman named Ernest Nieriker, 16 years her junior, the family's second improbable romance across an age gap, mirroring yours inverted. May, painting in Paris, happy in a way that radiates out of her letters, and then pregnant, and in November 1879 she gives birth to a daughter, and names her Louisa May Nieriker, names her for you, and for a few weeks the letters home are triumphant. Then childbed fever, the old killer of women, the one that stalks every 19th century birth. Through December the news worsens by mail, each letter 10 days old by the time it reaches Concord, so that you are reading about a crisis that has already resolved, one way or the other, an ocean away. And there is a special cruelty in that lag, hope and dread travelling by steamship. She dies on the 29th of December 1879, 7 weeks after the birth. She is 39. You learn of it when Emerson, old now fading himself, walks across to the house with the telegram in his hand because he cannot bear for you to hear it from paper alone, and you see his face, and you know before he speaks. You never see her grave. She's buried in Paris. And then her last wish arrives, and it detonates gently in the middle of your remaining life. May has left you her baby. She decreed it before the birth, with May's particular blithe certainty. If anything happens, the baby goes to Louisa. In September 1880, a ship from Europe docks in Boston, and a captain carries down the gangway a 10-month-old girl in a white cloak and puts your dead sister's daughter into your arms. You are 47, unmarried, mercury-poisoned, exhausted, and the most famous author of children's books in America, and you look down at this child. She has May's golden hair. You notice it instantly. You write it down. And the fire that has been your sin and your engine since 1843 finds its final assignment. They call her Lulu. And the last strange gift of your life is that you, who refused marriage, who wrote that liberty was a better husband than love, you get at the end motherhood anyway, sideways, out of grief. You're too sick to care for her alone. There are nurses, there is Anna, but the delight is yours. You write her little stories, Lulu's library, actual published volumes, spun out of the tales you tell her at bedtime. She calls you Aunt Wee Wee before she can manage the syllables. On your bad days, she's brought to your room and plays on the carpet while you lie propped watching. And you note with your old dry precision that she's the only medicine that reliably works. Because the days are mostly bad now. The 1880s are the long ebb. Vertigo, dyspepsia, the circling pains, the sleeplessness. Your throat and voice trouble you. Your heart runs strangely. You try everything the age can sell an ailing rich woman. Rest cures, water cures, homeopathy, mind cure, massage, a magnetic quack or two, and you report on all of it in your letters with the gallows comedy that never leaves you, rating your healers like bad hotels. You keep writing because you are you. Joe's Boys gets finished in 1886, painfully, a few minutes a day, closing the March family saga for good with an author's note that half apologises for the delay by explaining truthfully that the writer has been ill. And in 1882, your father's great mind, the mind that survived the wreck of every scheme it ever launched, is broken by a stroke. Bronson lingers for 6 years, paralysed, wordless at first and then nearly so, tended in Boston. And you pay for that too, of course. The ledger never closes. The old philosopher who would not work for money ends his days entirely kept by the daughter whose anger he once catalogued as a fault. If you feel the irony, you don't gloat in writing. What you write instead, visiting him, is tenderness. The fury of the Fruitlands child banked down long ago into something more complicated. He was impossible, and he was visionary, and he was your father, and he built you a desk. By 1888, you're living at a nursing home in Roxbury run by a Dr. Rhoda Lawrence. You, the best-selling author in America, in a rest home at 55, keeping to milk and farina diets, writing letters, planning books you know you may not write. And on the 1st of March, 1888, you're driven into Boston to see your father, because everyone understands he is at the very end. Stand in that room, because it is the last scene, and it is better than anything either of you could have invented. Bronson Alcott, 88 years old, is propped on pillows, past speech almost entirely, his white hair on the linen, the March family's absent father present at last, dying in the light of a Boston window. You come to the bedside. You kneel or you lean. The accounts vary in the small details. Families always vary in the small details. And you take his hand, and he gathers himself, and he looks at you, and he says in substance the words the family will keep forever. I am going up. Come with me. And you answer him, and everyone in the room hears it. Words to the effect of, I wish I could. You leave. It is a raw, cold day, and by one account you go out into it without your warm wrap, the fur cloak forgotten in the emotion of the goodbye. A detail so on the nose that if you'd put it in a novel, an editor would have cut it. The woman who spent her whole life keeping everyone else warm, catching her death in the cold. Within a day you are seized with violent head pain and collapse. On March 4th, 1888, your father dies. They decide not to tell you. You're too ill. You drift in and out asking after him. And on March 6th, 1888, 2 days after Bronson, without ever learning he had gone ahead, you follow. I am going up. Come with me. I wish I could. And then she did. You are buried at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Concord, on Author's Ridge, with Emerson and Thoreau and Hawthorne a few steps away, the great men who never saw you coming, and with Lizzie, and with Marmee, and eventually the rest. Your grave is small and flat. To this day, strangers leave pens on it. Anna, the last of the 4 March girls, lives until 1893, keeping the houses and the memory. Lulu, little Lulu of the golden hair, is taken back to Europe by her father, grows up in Switzerland, lives to be nearly 96 and dies in 1975. Think about that. A woman who sat on Louisa May Alcott's lap, alive in the age of moon landings. The past is that close. It is always that close. And the book, the little book of moral pap, the one you wrote in 10 weeks with a headache, the one you and your publisher both thought was dull, the book never stops. It has never once been out of print in over 150 years. It has crossed into every major language on earth. Generation after generation of readers, especially the fierce, inconvenient, fire-carrying girls, the ones whose anger everyone calls a flaw, open it and find Joe March and feel some of them for the first time seen. Writers beyond counting will trace their beginning to it, and almost none of those readers closing the warm covers will know what the warmth was made of. A frozen attic, a barley field harvested in bedsheets ahead of a storm, $4 for 7 weeks, a needle laid down on a coverlet in March of 1858, a lock of a blacksmith's hair, calomel, a shaved head, a paid ledger, a baby in a white cloak coming down a gangway. You didn't write your life. You wrote the mercy your life never showed you, and you gave it away to strangers' children forever. That may be the most generous act in American literature. It cost exactly everything, and you knew the price the whole time, and you paid it the way you paid everything, in full, early, without being asked twice, and that is the whole arc of it, beginning to end. But an arc is not a life. An arc is what you see from a distance, and this channel doesn't do distance. So now that you know where every road leads, now that you know which sister is walking toward which march, let's go back down into the days themselves, slowly this time, the way they were actually lived, hour by hour, in the hands and the feet and the stomach. Because you can't fall asleep to a map, you can fall asleep to a road. Let's start with a summer day at Fruitlands, before the collapse, when the experiment still believed in itself. It is June of 1843, and you wake at 5 to the sound of a scythe being whetted. A long ringing scrape, metal on stone, one of the men in the yard drawing the whetstone down the blade in slow strokes, and the sound carries in the early air the way all sounds carry before the heat comes up. There are birds. You have to give the place this much. It is beautiful. The farmhouse sits on a slope above the Nashua Valley, and on a June morning the whole valley below is filled with mist like a bowl filled with milk, and the hills stand out of it blue and soft, and your father stands on the doorstep looking at it with his face full of light, absolutely certain that Eden is achievable by autumn. Cold water, coarse bread, and then the morning bath of conversation, because at Fruitlands breakfast comes with philosophy the way other farms' breakfasts come with bacon. The men discuss. That is the verb of this place. They discuss whether root vegetables are spiritually inferior to fruits, because roots grow downward into darkness, while fruit aspires toward the sun. This is a real conversation, held seriously by adults, while the actual beans need hoeing. You sit on the bench with your bread, 11 years old, swinging your feet, listening to grown men debate the moral character of a carrot. Then the day's work, and the work is real, even if the plan is not. You weed. You know weeding in your body forever after. The squat that burns the thighs in the first 10 minutes and then goes numb. The 2-fingered pinch low on the stem, down at the soil line, because if you pull high, the weed snaps and laughs at you. The purchase and the little tearing give as the roots let go. The smell that comes up when you break the ground crust, green and wet and mineral, the smell of the underside of things. Soil packs under your fingernails in black crescents that stay all summer. Cutworms curl into grey commas when you turn them up. By 8 the sun has weight, an actual pressing weight across the back of your neck, and the linen sticks to you, and the flies arrive and make the day's long acquaintance with your ears. Water comes from the well in a bucket whose rope has a splintery patch that everyone knows and everyone forgets, and finds again with a palm. Dinner at midday is vegetables and bread and water and more discussion. In the afternoon, lessons under a tree if the weather is fine, and these are, in fairness, the good hours. Your father teaching outdoors, asking his strange luminous questions. What is patience? Where does a thought come from? And letting children actually answer. And then more work, and supper, and the long light of a June evening, and the men talking on the doorstep while the mist comes back to the valley, and your mother behind them all in the kitchen, working, because the visionaries have never once in the history of visions washed a supper dish. You go up to bed while it's still faintly light, all four girls, and you lie listening to the low male voices below rise and fall, planning paradise, and to the small clinks of your mother finishing the kitchen alone. And even at 11 you can hear which of those two sounds is holding the house up. Now a winter day, 10 years later, in Boston, when you're 21 and the family fortunes are at low tide and you are earning with the needle. You wake in a rented room where the water in the pitcher has a lens of ice on it, and you dress under the blankets. A skill, a genuine skill, working the cold stockings up while keeping the quilt tented over you, saving the body's little envelope of warmth to the last possible second. Breakfast is bread and weak tea, and then the day's work is sitting. A chair by the window for the light, because daylight is free and oil is not, and a stack of cut linen pieces on the left, and the finished pile growing on the right, and between them, you and the needle. Feel the actual mechanics of a shirt seam, because you will do this 10,000 times. The needle goes in with the little resistance. New linen is stiff, almost bawdy, and pushes back, and you drive it with the brass thimble on your middle finger, a tiny dented dome that becomes as familiar as a tooth, and draw the thread through with that faint hiss, and again, stitches small and even, because uneven stitches come back. Rejected and rejected work is unpaid work. Your eyes do the close focus for an hour, and then need to be lifted and aimed at the rooftops across the street to unknot. The window light moves across the floor, and you move your chair after it, following the sun around the room like a plant. By afternoon, the cold has won the corners of the room and is negotiating for the middle, and your feet go from cold to aching to a kind of absent numbness, and you put them on the rung of the chair, and you sew. And while your hands make shirts, your head makes stories. That is the secret economy of these years. The body's at the window doing piecework. The mind is in Spain in a castle, with a dark heroine plotting revenge on everyone who ever paid her $4. In the evening, when the sewing light dies, you light the lamp you've budgeted for and you write the story down fast, and the two labours braid into one income, needle and pen, pen and needle. And years later, a doctor examining your worn-out right hand won't be able to say which of the two ruined it. And the honest answer is both. And the honester answer is, the ledger did. Now let me give you the good day. There has to be one good day in full, and it belongs to Thoreau. It is the late 1840s, Concord, and Henry Thoreau, your neighbour, your family's friend, a man whom the town regards as an amiable failure, and whom you regard correctly, takes a boatful of children out on the river. You are one of them. The boat smells of sun-warmed wood and river mud and the faint pitchy smell of the man himself, wood smoke and pencil cedar, because his family makes pencils and the cedar is in his coat forever. He rows without hurry. He can make the oars completely silent when he wants to, dipping them so cleanly they don't knock or splash. And he does this when you approach the muskrat lodge, holding one finger up, and the whole boatload of children goes church quiet, and the water tocks softly against the hull, and there, a brown head cutting a V across the still water, and Henry looks at you children as if he has personally arranged this and is pleased with the delivery. He tells you the tobacco-white cobwebs on the morning grass are handkerchiefs dropped by fairies. He shows you that a water lily, picked and held, is cool on the palm like something kept in a cellar. He plays his flute in the drifting boat, and the sound goes out over the water and comes faintly back off the far bank a half-beat late. So the river seems to be learning the tune, and you, the girl whose anger is a household topic, sit in that boat entirely at peace, and you file the whole afternoon away in the deep storage, and 20 years later you will spend it. The boy Laurie will get some of Ladislas's charm, but the soul of everything good and free and outdoors in your books, the running, the rivers, the belief that a child is a wild thing and correctly so, that is Henry's with interest. He dies in the spring of 1862 of the tuberculosis that had been climbing through him for years, and half of Concord finally shows up for a man it had spent decades condescending to, and you write a poem about his flute. When your war comes, 8 months later, you carry the memory of one silent oarsman into a building full of screaming, and it is not nothing. Carried peace never is. Now the night shift. One full night at the Union Hotel Hospital, hour by hour, because this is the Crucible and it deserves the full walkthrough. 9 in the evening, Georgetown, January 1863. You climb the stairs from supper. Supper was bread, a scrape of the infamous butter, and coffee that tastes of the pot, and take the ward from the day nurse, who gives you the report in a low voice at the door. Which beds are worst? Who had morphine and when? Who is not expected to see morning? The ward is the old ballroom, 40 beds, 1 stove, mid-room, its iron flank ticking as it cools, its small mica window throwing a dull orange patch on the boards. The lamps are turned down to buds of flame. The painted shut windows sweat on the inside. The air is a used, thick, breathed many times air, warm near the stove and river cold at the walls, carrying the composite smell you have stopped consciously smelling, wound, body, whale oil smoke, carbolicless nothing. Though it is in your hair and your dress and will come home to Concord in your trunk. You make the first round with the shaded lantern. This is a skill now. You walk the aisle slow, letting the light fall on each face just long enough. Sleep, sleep, fever, sleep. You can tell fever sleep by the sound, a dry click in the breathing, and by the shine on the face. Bed 9 is awake. Bed 9 is always awake. Bed 9 is a Rhode Island sergeant whose shattered arm aches worst at night, and you stop. And he doesn't want anything. He wants 30 seconds of standing there, which you give, and a remark about the weather being cold enough to freeze the mercy out of a chaplain, which is his joke. Nightly, and you laugh at it nightly, because on night shift a repeated joke is not a joke. It is a rope between 2 people. 10 o'clock. Medicines. You measure by lamplight. Drops of laudanum counted aloud in a whisper, because counting silently invites error, the glass rod clicking on the glass lip, the smell of it dark and sweetish. Quinine bitter enough that the men make faces like boys, whiskey punch for the ones on stimulants. Your hands do it all in the near dark, and the cold makes them slow, and you will not let them be wrong. Midnight. The fever hours begin. Fevers climb at night. Every nurse knows it. No doctor of 1863 can tell you why. And the muttering starts up ward-wide, a low tide of dream talk. Men refight Fredericksburg in their sleep. You hear the same words over and over from different beds. Steady, steady, up, get up. and names. So many names, brothers' names, and the word that comes most from boys and grown men both, in exactly the same small voice, which is mother. You go to the worst of them and do the nurse's ventriloquism, answering as whoever is being called, because it works, because the fevered brain wants the voice more than the fact, and a hand quiets under yours, and the muttering sinks. 2 o'clock is the hard hour. Yours, not theirs. 2 o'clock is when your own body presents its complaints, the arches of your feet burning, the back of you one long ache, your eyes drying in the smoky air, and the cough you're pretending not to have scratching at the door of your chest. You walk to the cold end of the ward and back to wake yourself. You chew a crust saved from supper. You stand at the stove and spread your fingers over the iron, and the heat crawls into them. And for 1 minute you let yourself think of Concord, of the snow coming down soft over Orchard House, of May asleep with her drawings pinned around her, of Marmee. And then you fold the thought close like a letter, because homesickness at 2 a.m. on a ward is a leak in a boat, and you bail it, and move. 3 o'clock, a death. Not John, John's night comes later, but one of the quiet ones, a consumption-thin boy from Maine, typhoid, who has been sinking politely for a week as if he didn't want to trouble anyone. You notice because the ward's sound changes. You have learned that a ward has a chord, all the breathings together, and your ear flags the missing note before your mind does. You go to him. It is already over, or nearly. There is a long space, then one more breath, like a sentence adding one last word, then nothing. You stand a moment. You close his eyes with 2 fingers. The eyelids cool already, and they stay closed, which they don't always. You fold his hands. You note the time for the record. In the morning you will write to Maine. Around you, 39 men sleep on, and you decide, as you always decide, not to wake anyone, 'cause grief will be here after breakfast, and sleep will not. 5 o'clock. The building wakes below you. The kitchen clatter starting up. The pump handles squeal in the yard. Wagon wheels outside. The windows go from black to iron grey. The men wake coughing, joking, groaning, alive, most of them. Alive. And the day nurse comes yawning up the stairs, and you give the report at the door in a low voice. Which beds? Who had morphine and when? Who did not see morning? And you climb to your closet of a room with your feet screaming and your mind ringing, and you sleep like something dropped down a well. You did 6 weeks of those nights. The mercury did the rest. And when I tell you that you then went home and turned all of it into a funny little book, the lavender water joke, the Saturday night bath joke, the sergeant's chaplain joke, understand what that alchemy is. It is not lying. It is the deepest kind of soldiering, taking the worst thing you have and making it carryable for the people back home. You did it for the mothers of Maine in 1863, and 5 years later you did it for all the mothers everywhere, forever, and called it Little Women. So let's watch you write it. One day at the desk, May 1868, Orchard House. You wake early in your room upstairs, the room with the little half-moon desk your father built between the 2 windows, a shelf really, a smooth board fitted to the wall, and this morning, like every vortex morning, you are at it before the house is properly awake. The pen is a steel nib in a wooden holder, the ink is in a squat bottle, and the sound of the work is a sound you could pick out of 1,000. The faint scratch and lift of a nib crossing paper with the tiny pock of the dip in between. Your right hand knows the whole choreography without you, knows how much ink a dip carries, about 1.5 lines. knows the exact angle where the nib runs smooth instead of catching, knows by the deep ache setting into the thumb's root when it has done its 4 hours and the left hand must take the pen and the left hand's letters lean the other way like trees in a different wind, and the typesetters in Boston will cope. You write Meg's chapters and hear Anna's actual voice saying the actual lines. You write Amy's vanities and are fair to May, mostly, and where you aren't, it's with love. You write Marmy's counsel and lift it whole from life, the confession about her temper, mastered daily for 40 years, is your mother's real confession, given to you once in a hard hour, and you set it in the book like a jewel in pawn, knowing she'll read it, knowing she'll know. And then there are the Beth pages, and the house gets very quiet around those, and here is the strange mechanical truth of writing you're dead. Your hand does not stop. The scratch and lift keeps its rhythm. The lump sits in your throat exactly where it sat in March of 1858, and your eyes do what eyes do, and the pen keeps moving. Because you learned long before this book that the work and the grief can occupy the same body at the same hour. They have done it all your life. They are old roommates. You write the gentle version. You give her the spring and the window and the peace. You leave out the undertaker. Downstairs at midday, your mother, who nursed the real death beside you, asks how the book goes, and you say it goes, and neither of you says more, and she puts an apple by your inkwell, and that is a complete conversation in this family, and you both understand every word of it. 10 weeks of days like that. 402 pages. A headache, like a stonemason working behind your right eye. And out the other end of it, the warm firelit house that everyone since has believed the Alcotts lived in. And one more day. The last one I'll give you in full, because it is the antidote to all the others. An afternoon with Lulu, about 1884. You're 51 and creaky as a gate, and it is a good day, which by now means the pain is at a distance you can do business over. Lulu is 4, and she is May all over again. The gold hair, the will, the sunny, unearned confidence. And she arrives in your room like weather, and the afternoon's programme is stories. She climbs up. She has a climbing method that involves your knee, your forearm, and a fistful of your dress, and no permission at any stage. And she settles into the crook of you with the boneless conviction of a cat, and she smells of milk and clean cotton, and faintly of the outdoors, and she issues the command, a story, about a naughty girl. They must always be about naughty girls. Your niece's literary taste is precise. And you, the author of Moral Pay-Up for the Young, are privately delighted to comply, because naughty girls are your original genre. So you tell one, and you feel the small weight of her go heavier as she leans in at the good parts, and her head is under your chin, and her hair, when the light comes through, it is absolutely her mother's hair. And there is a moment, there is always this moment, when the resemblance turns the afternoon briefly to glass, and you hold still through it, and it passes, and the child in your lap demands to know what the naughty girl did next, and you tell her, because that is the whole of your profession and always was. Someone you love asks what happens next, and you know. You write these little tales down and publish them as Lulu's library, and the reviews are kind and beside the point. The point is the weight in the crook of your arm. The point is that the ledger, after everything, ran one final unexpected line in your favour, and it was denominated in a 4-year-old, and you, who paid for everyone all your life, spend your last strength getting paid at last, in the only currency this family ever really dealt in. There are a few more days worth walking through before we let the dark have you. Small ones. the kind history skips and a life is made of. A moving day, for instance. Pick any of the 20-odd, they blur together on purpose. But let's take one in the 1850s, a Boston one, the family shifting from one set of cheap rooms to a cheaper set 6 streets away. Moving day in a poor household is a liturgy, and you know your office in it by heart. The trunks come out from under the beds. The big rope-handled one has a corner gone soft with damp, and it must be lifted from underneath, never dragged by the rope, or the rope will finish tearing loose the way it has been threatening to since New Hampshire. Books get packed first and carried in small loads because books are the family's one wealth and the one weight. Your father's manuscripts go in a box he supervises with more anxiety than he ever spent on the rent. Your mother wraps the few good things, the teapot that survived, a framed silhouette, the work box, each in a garment, so the clothing and the treasures travel as one flesh. And you carry the lamp yourself, wrapped in your shawl, walking the 6 streets with it held against your chest like an infant, because it is the one object that breaks, and because there is a version of this errand where a girl who has read too many novels imagines she is carrying the household fire from one hearth to the next, a small Roman priestess of a bankrupt temple, and the imagining gets her the 6 streets with her chin up, and that, in the end, is what imagination is for. It gets you the 6 streets. It always got you the 6 streets. By evening the new rooms have the beds up and the teapot out, and your mother, this never once failed in 20 removals, makes tea and sets the table properly, cloth and all in the middle of the boxes, and declares the new place home, and by the force of her declaring it, it is. You learned that from her too. That home is not a building, it is an insistence. You would spend a literary career selling that insistence to the world, and the world would buy it by the million, never guessing the recipe was perfected in flight. And a day in Boston at the very bottom, because there was a very bottom, and you never forgot its address. There is a stretch in the 1850s, you're about 25, when nothing sells, and the teaching has dried up, and the sewing is pennies, and you tramp the city with your manuscripts from publisher to publisher, and collect refusals like a beggar collects weather. One editor, a Mr. Fields, a great man of letters, looks over your pages and delivers his verdict, and the verdict is, "Stick to your teaching, Miss Alcott. You can't write." He says it kindly, the way great men say fatal things, and you walk home along the winter streets with the manuscript under your arm, and somewhere on that walk the fire does the thing the fire always does when struck. It does not go out, it sets, and you make him a silent promise. Years later, famous, you will repay a small loan he once made the family, and you will not be able to resist enclosing the message with the money. That you had decided to stick to your teaching after all, the teaching of the whole reading public at rather better rates. He takes it well, history reports. He had no choice. You had by then sold more books than every man who ever advised you to stop writing laid end to end. There is one dark night in that bottom stretch that has to be said plainly, because you said it plainly, and softening it now would be a betrayal of the woman who didn't soften it. There is an evening when you are alone in Boston, worn past the joint, every door closed, the family's need pressing on you like a weight on the chest, and you walk out to the mill dam, and you stand looking at the water, and the thought presents itself, the full thought, the final one, and you look at it steadily, the way you looked at everything. And what turns you home by your own account is not comfort, it is defiance. Something in you gets its back up and declares that there has been too much invested to quit before the returns come in, that the story was not over, and you of all people knew an unfinished story when you were standing in one. You went home, you wrote. Within the year, things turned, and you put the whole night, barely disguised, into a novel later, into the hardest chapter of work, so that some other girl standing at some other railing might read it and get her back up too. That is what you did with every scar you ever earned. You filed the serial numbers off and issued it to the next soldier. Now Europe briefly, because the one romance deserves its afternoon. It is 1865. Vevey, Switzerland. A pension on the lake, and you are there as companion to an invalid, which means your days are fetching shawls and reading aloud and being agreeable, the old profession in a better climate. And into the pension comes Ladislas Wisniewski, 20 years old, Polish, lately out of the failed uprising against the Russians, with a cough that tells you what his lungs have decided and a gaiety that tells you he has decided to ignore them. He calls you by a small nickname, teaches you scraps of French for scraps of English across a table, plays the piano in the evenings while the lake goes dark outside the windows. And there is one afternoon on the water, a rowboat, the Alps standing upside down in the lake until the oars break them, that you kept. That is the fact. You kept it. You, who documented everything, who accounted for every dollar and every death, drew a line of ink through the pages about him and left one sentence standing that you could never be told. Every locked door in a life full of open ones is a monument. Let it stand. What can be said is what you did with him. You took his laugh, his music, his mop of curls, his way of turning hardship into charm, and you gave them to a boy named Laurie next door to 4 girls, and made him immortal, and married him, with what one has to suspect was a small private smile, to somebody else. And one municipal morning, 'cause Triumph should get a scene too, Concord. Town meeting day, March of 1880. The first election after Massachusetts lets women vote for school committee. You have spent weeks going door to door with the registry papers, and Concord's women have mostly declined with the special stubbornness of the comfortable, and you have written tart things about it in the press, and now the morning is here. You arrive at the town hall with your 19 recruits, 20 women in a hall of men, some of the men smirking, some elaborately courteous, which is smirking in gloves, and the moderator calls for the ballots, and accounts differ on whether this was arranged kindness or your own manoeuvre, and knowing you, it was manoeuvre. The women vote first. You go up the aisle at the head of your column, boots loud on the plank floor, and you put the paper in the box. First woman to cast a ballot in Concord, Massachusetts. Concord of all towns, the town of the embattled farmers, and the shot heard round the world, which took 105 years to let Mrs. Anybody vote on a school board. No thunder sounds. The meeting moves to the next item. You note in your journal, dry as a good sherry, that no bolt fell on the State House, and the earth continued turning. Tame, you called it. But you had run to that box the way you ran the Boston Common at 6 with your hoop. First, out ahead, laughing at the field, and some victories are complete at any size. The seasons at Orchard House deserve their turn too, the good decade's rhythm, because for about 10 years there really was a version of the famous Warm House, bought and paid for by your pen, and it ran on a calendar you could set a story by. Spring came up the Lexington Road in mud and pigbirds, your name for the blackbirds from childhood, kept because Lizzie had laughed at it once. Your father in the garden, ancient and serene, staking peas with the concentration of a man staking the New Jerusalem. He was always at his best with growing things and worst with grown ones. The apple trees behind the house, real ones this time, 40 of them, bearing, went over in white, and the petals came down on the study windowsill, and you wrote with the window up and the smell of it coming in over the ink. Summer was pilgrims and escape, the famous author season, strangers up the path daily wanting Joe, and you perfecting your repertoire of evasions. The maid's apron once, they say, the deaf old lady once, the flat announcement at your own front door that Miss Alcott had gone to Vermont delivered by Miss Alcott, and then real escape, a few weeks at the shore or the mountains, where you walked yourself tired on purpose, testing the legs the mercury was slowly buying, spending strength while you had it like a sailor on shore leave, because you of all people knew what a ledger was and what an overdraft felt like coming. Autumn was work, the vortex season, always. Something about the first cold nights lit the boiler, and the house knew the signs and organised itself around them. Trays left at the study door, questions saved for later, the scratch and lift going in the upstairs room from grey morning to lamp-black night. Marmee, while she lived, kept the house's whole weather calibrated to that sound. It has gone quiet up there was a sentence with meaning in that family. So was, she's running well. And winter was the theatre season, the family season, the one the books were made of because it was the one that was true. Snow to the sills, the Concord girls and the neighbour children in the parlour rehearsing plays you wrote and stage managed and starred in. 40 years old and giving your full villain to an audience of 12 on a settee. Chestnuts in the fire shovel. Anna's boys wrecking the geography of every room. Your father reading aloud magnificently. Some philosopher no one else in the room could love, and being listened to anyway, because the voice was beautiful and the night was long and the fire was, at last, after everything, paid for. That was the house people think Little Women describes. It existed. It just came after the book instead of before it. You didn't record that house. You invented it, and then you built it, and then you lived in it. Show me another writer who ever collected on fiction at that rate of exchange. 2 more days, though, before that last road. 2 I promised and haven't fully paid. This channel keeps its ledgers too. The first is a Dedham morning deep in the 7 weeks, because I gave you the outline of that servitude, and an outline is a mercy the actual weeks never offered. It is February 1852. You wake at 5:30 in a servant's chamber at the top of the house. The family's rooms hold their heat overnight. Yours holds a washstand, a candle, and the cold. First duty, the kitchen fire, which means kneeling on a stone floor in the dark, raking yesterday's ash through the grate. The fine grey dust rising and settling on your sleeves, in your throat, sweetish and dead-tasting. Then build in the new fire, splints and shavings and small coal, your fingers so stiff the first match snaps. The kindling catches with that dry crackle and tick, and for 1 minute you kneel there with your palms out to it, and that minute is the day's entire allotment of being warmed before working. Then water. The pump in the yard is frozen most mornings, and you carry a kettle of hot from the new fire to pour down its throat before it will give. And then it gives. The handle bucking against your grip with each stroke, the water arriving in freezing gouts that always find your wrist between glove and sleeve. 2 buckets to the kitchen, 2 up the back stairs, and the back stairs of that house are steep and unlit, and a full bucket held out from the body to keep it off your skirts turns your forearm to wood by the landing. and the wire handle prints its line across your fingers, and you set the buckets down outside the family's doors quietly, because the family's asleep, because your morning is the machinery of their morning, and machinery is expected to run silent. Then boots. His boots. You black them in the scullery. The blackings tarry bite in your nose, the brush going in small circles, the leather slowly taking its shine, and you black them well, which is its own small act of war, because he leaves them for you precisely to remind you what you decline to be to him, and you return them perfect precisely to reply. Both of you understand the correspondence. Neither ever says a word of it. And in the afternoons, having hauled and scrubbed and shovelled, you are summoned to hear him read his essays aloud. This is the sentence's cruelest clause. You must sit with red cracked hands folded in your lap, while a man who has never carried water 2 steps reads you his thoughts on the elevation of the soul, and nod, and be improving company, and the essay is bad. That is the detail your fury kept for 20 years, and when at last you wrote the whole episode into a story called How I Went Out to Service, you made sure posterity knew the essays were bad. Lizzie, when you finally got home and told it all at the kitchen table, laughed until she had to hold the table's edge. Quiet Lizzie, laughing, and that laugh was worth something the $4 never touched. You could always tell a humiliation so that it fed your family instead of you. It was your first profession before the pen made it official. And the second day I owe you is gentler. An autumn afternoon in 1877, in the last weeks of nursing Marmee, because the account of her death went by in a paragraph, and she of all people has earned an hour of ordinary time. The sick room is the best room now, you saw to that. South-facing, the good chair. The plants moved in from all over the house because she likes green things at hand. Your mother is propped high against the pillows. The failing heart will not let her lie flat any more, so she lives at this half-recline like a captain keeping the deck, and even now, even translucent and breathless, she is unmistakably in command of the room. The afternoon's programme is small. You read to her. She likes the letters columns and the suffrage papers still, and she interrupts to argue with the printed opinions, 3 words at a time, pausing for air between them, and you wait out the pauses without ever once finishing her sentences for her, which is the discipline of love at a deathbed, and you learned it at Lizzie's. You brush her hair. It is thin and white now and takes no time at all, and you take a long time anyway. Slow strokes from the crown, her eyes closing under it the way a child's do, the way yours did when the hands were hers and the attic was cold, and the brush was the only luxury in the house. 50 years of that hair. You braid it loosely and settle her back, and she pats the coverlet for your hand and holds it, and looks at you for a while with an expression you will spend the rest of your life declining to describe to interviewers. She sleeps a little. You sit with her hand in yours, and the low sun coming through the geraniums on the sill, laying long green and red lozenges of light across the quilt, moving slower than anything, and the house is quiet below. Anna in the kitchen, the boys sent outdoors, and you do the sick room arithmetic you know so well by now, breaths to the minute without meaning to, and then you make yourself stop and just sit. There is a kind of sitting that is itself the work. Nobody pays for it. No ledger has a column for it. And it is the finest work you ever did, and you did it for every single one of them, and now you're doing it for the one who taught you how. She wakes as the light goes copper and asks. 3 words. Pause. 3 words. Whether you finished your writing today, 'cause to the end she guards your work like a sentry, This woman who copied out your first poems and called you her Louis, and believed, through every editor and every $4 winter before evidence existed, that you were going to be exactly what you became. You tell her the writing can wait. She frowns, magnificent the frown, undimmed, and tells you it cannot, and to go and do an hour before supper and she will be right here. So you go, because you never once won an argument with her, and it is too late to start. And you sit at the little desk in the fading light, and you write your hour. And downstairs your mother keeps the deck. She was right here for 45 years. Every word you ever sold was written inside the weather of her believing in you. The books outlived you both, and inside every one of them, holding the roof up, invisible as she always was, is her. And now the last stretch of road, and we will take it slowly, because it is evening in this story, and evening is what you came here for. The last years narrow the way a river narrows into its delta. The same water, spread thinner, moving slower, still moving. After Marmee dies in 1877, the house's centre of gravity is gone. And after May dies in 1879, the family is you and Anna and the boys and Lulu and a paralysed old philosopher in Boston. And you arrange all their lives like a quartermaster, because arranging is what you have instead of health. You buy Anna a house, the Thoreau family's old house on Main Street. There's a circle closing, and you set up the trusts, and you sort the copyrights, and you do the thing that only a person who has been poor in the marrow ever does with money. You make it boring, safe, allotted, defended. Anyone can earn a fortune. It takes a Fruitlands child to fully domesticate one. Your own days contract to a manageable round. Roxbury, Dr. Lawrence's quiet house among pines. A late breakfast your stomach may or may not honour. A walk if the legs permit, or a drive if they don't, wrapped in the fur cloak. Watching other people's chimneys smoke. Letters in the afternoon. You answer children's letters to the end in your own hand while your hand allows it, because the children write to Joe and Joe does not employ a secretary. A little work on the good days, a page, a paragraph, the pen heavier every season, and the evenings by the fire with the boarding house sounds around you, doors and dishes and somebody's piano, a life reduced to its embers and still, noticeably, warm. You know what is coming. That should be said because you said it, without theatre in letters, that your work was about done, that the machine was worn out in the family's service and you had no complaint of the bargain. You even kept the old joke running, that you had promised yourself as a girl to be rich and famous before you died, and had been fool enough to manage it, and would warn any young person against wishes, which have a way of being granted with the bill enclosed. 55 years old, and the account book of your life lay open where anyone could audit it. Every debt paid, every sister provided for, every child schooled, every grave bought and tended, one small girl with golden hair endowed like a duchess. Against all of which stood the single entry on the debit side, the one you never wrote down but carried in the joints and the nerves and the sleepless 2 a.m. hours, the cost of carriage. Paid also. Paid first, in fact. You always paid first. So when you stand in that Boston room on the 1st of March, 1888, holding your father's hand, the hand that built the desk, the hand that would not work for wages, the hand you fed for 40 years, and he gathers the last of that beautiful ruined voice and tells you he is going up and asks you to come with him. Understand that your answer was not a figure of speech either. I wish I could. The tiredness in that sentence is 50 years deep. It is Fruitlands deep. And 2 days after him, quietly, without ever being told he had gone ahead, as if the two of you were keeping one last appointment neither would name. You kept it. They laid you on the ridge with the others. Lizzie had been waiting there 30 years, Marmee 11. Emerson was a few steps off, and Thoreau with his flute, and Hawthorne, the most improbable literary neighbourhood in America, reassembled under the pines, and the scribbling girl who out-earned and outlasted and outloved the lot of them, home from work at last. And here is where I stop telling and let go, because the rest belongs to the dark. You have been listening a long time. Your own day is behind you now. Whatever it held, the errands and the screens and the small frictions and the things you carried that nobody saw, it is behind you, the way her days are behind her. You're lying somewhere warm. Feel that first. Honestly feel it. The weight of the covers on your legs, the pillow taking the full weight of your head, so your neck can finally resign its commission, the air of the room on your face, cool where the blanket's warmth ends. You have heat without hauling coal for it. You have light you can end with one motion. You have water that arrives clean and leaves silently. Every single one of those things this story's family would have called wealth beyond argument. You are lying right now in the house Louisa was trying to buy, so let the day go the way she let the pen go at the end of a vortex night. Finger by finger. It doesn't have to be finished. It never was finished. It only ever got laid down for the night, and the morning always knew where to pick it up. Let the sounds of your own house settle around you. The small ticks and shifts, the pipes somewhere, the far traffic or the wind, whatever your house says when it thinks no one is listening. Every house has said it. The Fruitlands farmhouse said it in cold cracks of plaster while 4 girls slept in a row. Orchard House said it in the apple boughs against the study window. The old hotel in Georgetown said it in 40 breathings and a ticking stove, and a tired woman with a shaded lamp learned to love the sound, because the sound meant everyone was still here. Everyone is still here. That is the whole message of a quiet house at night. You're warm enough, safe enough, tired enough. You have a roof and a bed and tomorrow waiting at a decent distance, and that is more than most of the people in this story had on their best night, and it is enough. It is enough. It is enough. Tomorrow there will be things to do. There are always things to do. She taught us that, if she taught us anything. Tomorrow there will be the work and the people and the lists, but that is tomorrow's ledger, and tomorrow's clerk will keep it. Right now there is only this. Let it come then. Let sleep take you the way the river took Henry's silent oars. No splash, no announcement, just the slow, certain glide. Let the day's voices fade the way the ward's muttering faded under a hand on the forehead. Let your thoughts slow and soften and space themselves out like the last stitches of a seam a tired girl is finishing by lamplight. One, and after a while another, and after a longer while, one more, and then the needle laid down. Centuries are passing, even now, even tonight. The Concord she walked is layered under new pavement. The Georgetown Hotel is gone. The pens have become keys, and the lamps have become this small glow you're about to put out. Everything about the furniture of life has changed beyond her imagining. But people still lie down at night worn out from loving their families, still add up what they earned against what everyone needed, still tell the softened version of the hard story to the children so the children can sleep, still keep one drawer, one page, one afternoon on a lake that is nobody else's business. Some things don't change. The tired body's right to rest doesn't change. You've earned this. However today went, you carried it, and carrying is the whole of the work. She'd tell you so herself, and she was never once wrong about work. So put it down, close the ledger, let the fire bank itself. The house is quiet, and everyone is still here, and the morning knows where everything is. Good night.